people united will never be defeated. The people united will never be defeated.
You're listening to The People's Voice, February 16th to 29th. Canada smears UNRWA to deflect from the genocide ruling by the International Court of Justice. Hours after the International Court of Justice ruled that Israel's siege of Gaza is plausible genocide, Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister stated that Ottawa had no clear position and would wait to hear the court's final decision, which is expected to take several years. The minister's shameful statement did not mention Canada's obligation under the Genocide Convention, which compels governments to take action to stop genocidal actions such as Israel's siege of Gaza. On the same day of the International Court of Justice decision, Canada's Minister of International Development announced that Canada was suspending additional funding to the UNRWA, which 2 million people in Gaza rely on for their survival. Ottawa's decision is based on an unproven claim by the Israeli government that 12 UNRWA employees out of a total of 30,000 may have participated in some way in the October 7th attack by Hamas. The organization Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East said that Ottawa's move to defund the UNRWA runs parallel to the Israeli government strategy of destroying the organization, noting that Israel has killed over 152 UNRWA employees since October 7th, with 253 documented attacks on personnel, schools, and other facilities sheltering thousands of displaced Palestinians. While it is true that there are many historical and continuing parallels between Canada's treatment of Indigenous people and Israeli apartheid, the real basis for Canada's support for Israel is economic. Canadian arm exports to Israel have skyrocketed from around $7 million in 2014 to nearly $28 million in 2022. Meanwhile, migrant agricultural workers need unionization with full rights. Canadian capitalism relies extensively on the labor provided by immigrant and migrant workers. One of the most obscene examples of this is in Canada's $135 billion agricultural and agri-food sector, which relies on over 70,000 migrant workers every year. Canada's temporary foreign worker programs were referred to by a UN Special Rapporteur as a breeding ground for contemporary forms of slavery. The report highlights the dangers that migrant agricultural workers face, such as poor living conditions, exposure to chemicals, or heat stress. Throughout the country, migrant agricultural workers face limits on their labor rights and are not allowed to form unions, hampering their right to bargain collectively. Ontario Communist Party leader Drew Garvey said that there is a whole range of reforms that are needed for migrant workers, including having full health care and legal protections. But in this specific situation, it's clear that we need a serious campaign to organize and protect migrant agricultural workers. The degree of exploitation and abuse is disgusting and needs to stop. Also, Labour leaders denounced Danielle Smith's anti-trans attacks. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith announced on January 31st that her right-wing United Conservative Party government was introducing new policies to radically limit transgender people's rights. The move was quickly followed by condemnation from various labour unions, including the Alberta Federation of Labour, the Alberta Teachers Association, Unifor, United Steelworkers of Western Canada, and the Canadian Union of Public Employees. The Alberta Federation of Labour president, Gil McGowan, said that the goal of the Smith government is to create scapegoats that sow division and erode trust in public institutions, especially our public schools. McGowan warned that the Conservative government was using this as a wedge issue to distract us from the fact that they're not doing anything to address the affordability crisis, the crisis in our healthcare system, the climate change crisis, or the drought and wildfire crisis that's going to slam us like a freight train in the spring. Internationally, US-South Korean actions stoke tensions with the DPRK. Nuclear tensions have increased on the Korean Peninsula, and continued provocations from the US and South Korea have resulted in the DPRK leader, Kim Jong-un, announcing he had finally given up on the idea of peaceful reunification. According to the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, last year the US and South Korea agreed to increase cooperation on the planning for future use of nuclear weapons, with support from Japan as well. On January 1st, South Korea's defense ministry repeated threats to destroy the DPRK's regime if it uses nuclear weapons. The DPRK has repeatedly stated its commitment to disarmament and has a stated policy that nuclear weapons will never be abused or used as a means for preemptive strike. However, the DPRK also argues that because of the severe threats it faces from the US nuclear arms in the region, it needs to develop nuclear weapons as a deterrent. In Cuba, the government commits to 29% green electricity in 6 years, and 100% by 2050. Currently, 95% of electrical energy production in Cuba is based on fossil fuels. This presents a significant challenge to the country as it tries to transition away from carbon emissions. Despite the urgency of this nearly overwhelming task, Cuba is facing the challenge with all of the determination, unity, planning, and progressive thinking that typifies its socialist society. The country recently announced that by 2030, 29% of its electricity will be produced by renewable sources, and by 2050, 100% of its energy production will be renewable. Throughout the process, Cuban companies will themselves be transformed from consumers of energy into generators of electricity. Alongside the shift to renewables, the plan involves transitioning to domestic energy sources to achieve what the government calls total energy sovereignty by the 2030s. Currently, for the Cuban economy and society to function normally, it requires roughly 8 million tons of fuel, which about 60% is imported. The transition to renewables will be based on solar, wind, and sugarcane biomass. Fortunately, technologies for renewable energy production are developing quickly, and Cuba is already seeing cost-effective production. That's all for now. For full stories and additional publications, check out pvonline.ca.